Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you for spending your time here with me today. I'm going to be making 3 cards today. I hope you enjoy the process. I'm still using background dies. I'm sort of trying to work out more ways that I can use them. I've made 3 cards. One of them I've layered the die cuts. One of them I have just put the die cut on top of the card, and the other one I have filled the die cut. For this first card I've used a no name die, and I've cut 3 of each of the pieces. It's a 2-piece die. I'm going to use liquid glue to stick those 3 layers on top of each other, so I end up with a very thick cutout. To make the card base, I cut a piece of white cardstock 11 3/4 inches by 4 5/8 inches, and I have scored that at 3 3/8 and from one end and 2 1/2 inches from the other end. I use clear glue to attach the panels that I've just made to the front of the card. This is a bit fiddly because you have to apply a fair amount of glue so that the whole piece sticks firmly to the front, and because it's quite heavy you want to make sure you've got enough glue to actually hold it in place. By sticking the 3 layers of cardstock together, you end up with something that's probably even slightly thicker than chipboard, so it is important that it will stick and hold to the card front. Having said that, I think I have applied a little bit too much glue, and you can actually see it through the die. While I was going for a classic card, being the white on white, I decided it was a bit too plain for my taste, and I used this piece of white paper that's got a light grey spot on it to cover the inside middle section of the card, just for a bit of added interest. To create the sentiment that's going to go inside of the card, I'm using this stamp that I got off the front of a magazine that I purchased. I'm going to stamp it with my embossing ink. First of all, I'll wipe my paper over with my powder puff, then using my Tim Holtz Distress ink I'm going to stamp the sentiment onto a piece of the same cardstock that I used on the inside of the card. Then I'm going to use some silver embossing powder and emboss the sentiment. I trim the cardstock down and use my corner rounder to round the corners on the sentiment so that it will be a bit more decorative on the inside of the card. I was not happy with the way that the greeting sort of got lost into the background, so I used the same technique to create the same greeting but used black embossing powder this time. I was happier with it, but not completely happy. So I went ahead and made my 3rd sentiment for this card. I ended up using silver embossing powder on a plain white piece of cardstock. I I still rounded the corners, and I used the same procedure as I used with the other two pieces. To complete this card, I add a vellum flower that I made using the Couture Creations CO724161 die. I made this for a previous project and didn't use it, so I'm going to use it on this card. I think it sticks with the classic feel of the card and just adds a little something to the front. For the second card, I'm using this once again. It's a no brand die, and I'm going to, well, I have cut that in white, and I'm going to back that with a mauve card. I'm cutting my card base to be 5 inches by 10 inches, and I'm going to cut that, or sorry, score that at 5 inches to make a 5-inch by 5-inch card. I then used my Aleene's Original Tacky Glue to attach the die cut to the front of the card. I apply a reasonable amount of glue to this. I don't actually cover the whole area, but I do put spots of it so that most of it is attached. I've gone through my stash looking for things to decorate the card with. I've got some gauze here that I've cut a piece off of and stretched it and frayed it a bit, and I'm going to use that as a base under the other decorations that I've got here. I've got a set of little beads on strings, or pearls on strings, that I'm going to use behind my flowers. I'm going to use the flowers that you can see next to my hand. So I'm going to use my hot glue gun to attach all of these flowers. I've used my Cottage Cuts Leafy Foliage die to cut some leaves from some green paper that I had in my stash, and I'm now just attaching them with a bit of glue. For the sentiment for this card, I decided once again to go for some embossing. So I used my Versamark embossing ink and a stamp that I got on another magazine, and stamp onto a piece of white cardstock. The embossing powder that I'm going to use is from, well, I'm not sure where it came from, but it's a glittery embossing powder, and it looks great when it's in real life. Once I've stamped and embossed my greeting, which says hello, I mount it on a piece of the same mauve cardstock that the card base was made from. I decided to use foam squares to mount my sentiment onto my card. Now that the sentiment's attached, that completes the card. I won't put anything on the inside of this card until I decide who I'm going to give it to and what the occasion is. My third card once again uses a no name die. I've used that die to cut several times. I've cut it in this orangey sort of paper, this mulberry sort of paper, and white. I'm going to use the white as the whole thing. That will be my base. So I'm going to cut a piece of black cardstock so that that sits on it, and then I'm going to use the coloured pieces to fill in parts of the die. I've used black cardstock to create a card base. The card base is 6 1/4 inches by 4 1/4 inches. This gives me an 1/8 of an inch border around the whole outline of the die cut. Once again, I'm using the Aleene's original tacky glue to attach the die cut to the front of the card. I'm now going to take the pieces from the pattern paper that I've cut and fill in the areas that I want to be coloured. So you can see here I'm putting the pieces into the butterfly from the burgundy coloured cut that I did. I have to say this is very time consuming and tedious, and I will probably never do it again, but I wanted to try it, and yeah, I did. I'm going to go ahead and use the same technique to fill in the flowers on the die cut to give the front of the card more colour. Even when I had finished this, it wasn't colourful enough for me, and I thought about colouring the leaves with big brush markers or something like that in a green, but I resisted the urge and I stuck with what I'd originally planned to do. Once I got into the rhythm of putting these pieces in, it wasn't so bad, and I think the flowers were a bit easier than the butterfly. But the silhouette pick-me-up tool came in very handy when I was doing this project, so I am a bit more adept at using it now than I was previously. I've had plenty of practice with this card, I must admit. So this is what it looked like once I'd filled in all the flowers with the different colours. For the sentiment for this card, I used one of the greetings that I print out on my computer. I just type up a whole heap of them at one time in different sizes and fonts and print them out so that I've got them handy for when I want them. This one says "Get well soon." I've cut it out and I'm going to mat it onto some black so that it will stand out against the white of the die cut. I attached foam squares to it because I'm going to use them to attach it to the card. I want a bit of extra height there. Because the card is black, I decide to add a piece of this pink paper to the inside of the card. I've cut it to 4 inches by 6 inches. That will leave a little black border all the way around it. I ink the edges and then use double-sided tape to attach it. Here I'm just messing around trying to decide what to put on the front of the card. I decided to make the butterfly stand out by putting an outline of pattern paper over the white outline so that brings it up from the other white outlined items on the card. And then I'm going to attach a couple of flowers from my stash. Once the flowers are in place, I then attach the greeting using the foam. So that completes my cards for today. I hope you've enjoyed my video. If you have, please subscribe to my channel if you don't already, and click the bell next to the subscribe button so you're notified each time I upload a new video. Thank you for sharing your time here with me today. And if you'd like to share my video with your friends, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.